We are joined by Vasyl Filipchuk, a former Ukrainian diplomat and one of the leading experts on national security and on issues related to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. We are here to raise a couple of questions regarding the impact of coronavirus infection on security situation in the east of the country and the dynamics of the conflict, of the negotiations, and of all issues which are related to this quite urgent problem of Ukrainian national security. We will try to concentrate on the impact of the coronavirus on the local population, on the general health of the population in the war zones, on the level of hostilities and opportunities for continued cross-border cooperation. So the floor is yours, Vasyl. If you have any comments, you're welcome.
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to start with news we just arrived, that we have a new, seems to be successful exchange of prisoners of war. Today, our Vice Minister for Integration just announced that they arrived to a contact line and they started direct exchange of prisoners of war with so-called Donetsk-Luhansk People's Republic. And it's very, very good news, as after last year significant progress in conflict settlement, this was a certain period of standstill, of stagnation in process of Donbass conflict settlement. And we, in general, started to worry that we might get into freezing of any attempts for conflict settlement due to a number of elements, which include Ukraine's institutional weakness, internal political dynamic in our country and in Russia as well, which is not very conducive for settlement, and also coronavirus drastically changed agenda of policymakers, putting conflict settlement aside. While with application of best international practices, such kind of crises could open a new chances for conflict settlement. We noticed in our case a bit different situation when Ukraine started to implement its measures against spread of coronavirus. A contact line was basically closed. Any movement between Ukraine and its not controlled territories stopped, and instead of providing humanitarian assistance and showing to local populations that we care about them, from Kiev side there was a message: we just close all the holes, we close all the channels of communication, and we care about ourselves, not even showing any sign of a responsibility for people who are under control of so-called Donetsk-Luhansk People's Republic. Actually, what is interesting is the same happened from Russian side first days, but after some days we also received information that Russia decided to reopen contacts with Ukraine's non-controlled territories, and it's again is not quite good message. Before our conversation, I spent half an hour looking at different news information from media from not controlled territories, also from our media which focus on not controlled territories. And I noticed that yes, on one side there is certain level of worries about situation, but they basically copy what is happening in Russia. They referring to information which they receive from Russia. They refer to recommendation about healthcare situation, directly referring to Moscow. They basically copy what is happening in Russia, and no single reference to what is happening in Ukraine. They pretend that there is no big spread of virus. I was unable to find exact data as of now how many infected or deaths. There were very controversial data which I found. Some mentioned only 2 infected, another 17, another more than 50, so quite difficult to understand a real situation. So we can conclude that as of now, it's very good that at least something happened, like exchange of prisoners of war, while we could be in situations that overall March, April, and possibly May could be a lost months for conflict settlement. If we would see that exchange of prisoners was successful and lead to new opening in negotiating process, coronavirus again could present a good opportunity from Ukrainian side to show its care, its openness to help people on that territory. And it would be a significant moral, psychological step forward. Otherwise, we would be back to what we witnessed last 5 years, when it was only some small steps without significant overall improvement of the situation.
Great. It actually goes along my own observations as well, since the coronavirus crisis could both provide opportunities within the conflict settlement and pose some risks. And so far it seems that risks are overweighting, and on the other hand, sides do not take the opportunities which are provided by the situation. I also was suggesting that Ukraine should offer assistance to the people on the occupied territories, and also our position could have been more active in this regard. And on the other hand, we are witnessing a little bit different strategies of dealing with the crisis from Ukrainian side and from the side of the uncontrolled territories, which is more close to what Russia is doing regarding the medical situation. The quarantine has been finally installed, and some measures are being taken, but at the same time, we don't know, as Vasyl mentioned, we don't know the exact information on the number of cases and number of deaths, only speculations on the issue. On the other hand, political situation has been quite difficult before the quarantine and before the coronavirus crisis, with recent decisions in the Minsk group regarding this consultative initiative, and it raised significant reaction in Ukraine, and the crisis helped to postpone it a little bit and provided some time for decision makers to understand what are the ways of dealing with the situation further. If exchange of prisoners is taking place, I assume we can expect some progress in overall dynamics of conflict management, or is it just a technical step which would bring no significant results as it happened with previous exchange?
It's a very good point. Actually, I've also been analyzing what is a new modified Ukraine's policy on Donbas settlement. We all remember that President Zelensky was elected as President of Peace. We all remember his sincere effort at the beginning to move on conflict settlement agenda. Yes, he decided not to announce Zelensky peace plan. He decided not to review overall situation in relations with Russia. He decided to continue with Minsk process, with all pluses and minuses, risks and opportunities in Minsk process. Fine, but there was certain progress, especially at the end of the last year. However, what we noticed is, first of all, a very significant institutional weakness of Ukraine authorities, which limited their field of maneuver, and while engaging into Minsk logic, they could but come to increased internal political risks. And efforts which were taken by a new head of presidential administration, Mr. Yermak, to make certain progress in implementation of Minsk demands on political dialogue, changes to the constitution, and so on and so forth, immediately led to internal turbulence, attacks, and with weak institutions and bad communication instruments, they couldn't but make step back. And it could lead very quickly to stumbling blocks, to logic, which we witnessed in 2015-19 with previous President Poroshenko, when we had only rhetoric, pro-war rhetoric, mutual accusations, no progress, and conflict getting again into a deadlock. This exchange of prisoners gives certain hopes that yes, they can get back to more proactive negotiating process. But again, two key questions: what you will do with institutional weaknesses, bad communication, and lack of really systemic vision of conflict settlement. None of this problem is settled. They have not shown a real ability to control our right-wing forces. They have not shown even ability to control their own faction. They have very limited capacities to communicate with not only groups of spoilers or opponents, but with wider society. They have no real vision how to deal with wider agenda with Russia. They have weaken their links and cooperation with Western partners, which is obvious, again, because of number of mentioned problems before, and also because of change of the agenda in both US and EU. So how you will progress with all these objective factors which just limit any area of maneuver, any space of maneuver for current Ukrainian authorities. So you come to not very optimistic conclusions that yes, on one side still there are possibilities to intensify efforts and to make some significant steps for conflict settlement. On the other side, I'm afraid that window of opportunity is getting is closing very quickly, is getting closed, and we might talk about weeks or months while still there could be some progress, but again, with coronavirus changing priorities. Look, if we analyze, for example, our Ukrainian media and political disputes agenda over last months, it was only coronavirus. Now it's getting more about internal economic problems. It will be more about situation with healthcare area. It will be more about regions showing sometimes very unloyal behavior. So you have growing a number of problems which would sideline Donbass. So with institutional weakness, a lack of communication, lack of vision, and changed political agenda, we might come very close to a situation similar to what we had before, with very comfortable patriotic rhetoric, with very comfortable mutual accusation tactics, and no serious progress later in the year.
Sure, I totally agree that we have to get used to the most likely scenario, and even situations like serious situations like the one with the coronavirus would have a very few chances to change anything. Okay, thank you very much for your valuable comments, Vasyl, and take care.
My pleasure.